The morning sun filtered through the car windows as Richardson gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension. Beside her, Maya pressed her small forehead against the cool glass, watching the streets of suburban Columbus, Ohio pass by in a blur of familiar landmarks. The courthouse loomed ahead like a gray monster waiting to swallow them whole. His jaw clenched as she navigated the parking lot, searching for a spot far enough away that they might have a moment of peace before entering that terrifying building. "Remember what we talked about, baby," whispered, though they had gone over it 100 times already. "You were sleeping. It was dark outside. You didn't see anything clearly." Maya's throat tightened. She was only 8 years old, but she was old enough to understand that her mother was asking her to lie. The concept of lying under oath had been explained to her by a kind social worker who visited their home, but the severity of it didn't truly register until this moment, the moment when it became real. The courthouse steps felt like climbing a mountain. Maya's small hand disappeared into her mother's grip as they ascended, passing news crews with cameras and microphones. Reporters shouted questions but kept her head down, protecting her daughter as best she could from the chaos. Maya caught fragments of their shouts, testimony expected to be crucial. Young witness. Haste. Inside, the courthouse was nothing like Maya had imagined. She had pictured something from television shows, all drama and tension, but the reality was somehow worse. The building smelled of old wood, leather, and something chemical that made her nose wrinkle. The hallways echoed with footsteps and muffled conversations. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a pale, sickly glow that made her head hurt. In the waiting area, Maya sat rigidly beside her mother on a hard bench. Her new dress, the one her mother had insisted she wear, white with a pink ribbon, suddenly felt too tight. She tugged at the collar, but her mother gently moved her hand away. "Sit still, sweetheart. We need to look respectable." Through the glass doors of the courthouse, Maya could see families coming and going. Some looked relieved, others looked devastated. An elderly woman shuffled past with tears streaming down her face. A man in an expensive suit spoke rapidly into his phone, his face purple with anger. This place, Maya realized, was where lives changed. This was where people's futures were decided. That's when she heard the sound that made her heart leap, a soft whimper, followed by the gentle click-click-click of nails on the marble floor. Buddy appeared around the corner, his golden coat gleaming under the courthouse lights like he carried sunshine with him. Behind him walked Mr. Henderson, the court's official animal handler, a kind man with a warm smile. "Maya," Mr. Henderson said gently, "I brought Buddy in early so you two could have some time together before everything starts. I thought you might need your friend." His expression softened momentarily, the first hint of humanity on her face since they'd left the house. She nodded, understanding that sometimes a child needed comfort more than she needed control. Buddy immediately padded over to Maya, his tail wagging with such enthusiasm that his entire back half seemed to move. Maya buried her face in his fur, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent that meant safety. Buddy was her emotional support dog, trained specifically to help children through traumatic experiences. He had been with Maya since she was 6 years old, and in many ways, he knew her better than anyone. He knew when she was afraid, when she was sad, when she was lying. "Good boy," Maya whispered into his ear. "Good Buddy, I'm so scared." Buddy pressed his massive head against her chest, and for a moment the chaos of the courthouse faded away. There was just a little girl and her dog, and the unconditional love that flowed between them. Buddy didn't care about the case, about about whether she told the truth or lied. He loved Maya completely and without reservation. That love was both a comfort and a source of crushing guilt, because Buddy would know. Somehow, Maya was certain that Buddy would know if she lied. An hour later, as the time approached for the proceedings to begin, Mr. Henderson led Buddy away to a special area designated for service animals during testimony, pulled Maya to her feet, smoothing down her dress one final time. "Remember," said, leaning down so their eyes were level, "we're protecting Daniel, we're protecting our family. Everything you say in that courtroom needs to help Mr.'s case stay strong. We need reasonable doubt. We need the jury to think someone else might have done this. Can you do that for your brother?" Maya nodded mutely, but inside she was screaming, because she had definitely seen. On the night in question, she had woken up at 2 a.m. with a nightmare and gone to get a glass of water. The kitchen window faced the side street, and that's when she saw him. Her brother Daniel, 16 years old, moving quickly through the darkness with another figure she didn't recognize. They were both running, both terrified. And then, 15 minutes later, she heard sirens. Lots of them. The next morning, the news reported a break-in 3 blocks away. A man's house had been ransacked, and he was in the hospital with serious injuries. The police had arrested Mr. because he had a prior record and had been seen in the neighborhood. But it wasn't him. Maya knew it wasn't him, and her mother knew she knew. The massive wooden doors to the courtroom loomed ahead, placed her hand on the small of Maya's back and gently pushed her forward. The doors swung open, and the room came into view, rows of wooden benches, the judge's elevated bench, the jury box with 12 faces staring at her with curiosity and sympathy. And there, at the defendant's table, sat Mr. himself. He was a thin man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. He had lived 2 doors down from them for 5 years. He had helped Maya find her lost cat once. He had brought her family cookies at Christmas. Now he looked at her with hope in his eyes, hope that she would tell the truth, hope that she would help save him. That's when the bailiff called her name and Maya's heart stopped. This was it. This was the moment where her childhood ended and she became someone else. Someone forced to choose between family and truth, between love and justice, between the comfortable lie and the devastating truth. As she walked to the witness stand, her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Everything moved in slow motion. The Bible was produced. Her hand was placed on it. The words came out of her mouth, words about telling the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help her God. God, she thought desperately, I could really use your help right now. Judge sat in her elevated position, her dark eyes sharp and intelligent, already studying Maya with an intensity that made the little girl feel exposed, vulnerable, like she was made of glass, and the judge could see straight through to the terrible secret locked inside her chest. The first question came softly from the prosecutor. Maya, can you tell us what you were doing on the night of March 15th? And everything changed. Maya, can you tell us what you were doing on the night of March 15th? The prosecutor's voice was gentle, almost soothing, but it felt like a noose tightening around Maya's throat. She looked down at her small hands folded on the witness stand, then back toward her mother sitting in the gallery. His expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes burned with a message. Stick to the story. Protect your brother. I was sleeping, Maya whispered, her voice barely audible in the courtroom. The judge immediately leaned forward. Speak up, please, so the jury can hear you, Judge instructed, not unkindly, but there was something in her tone that made Maya's stomach clench. It was as if the judge could sense that something was wrong. I was sleeping, Maya repeated louder this time. In my bed, I was sleeping. The prosecutor, a woman named Sarah with sharp features and an even sharper mind, approached the stand with a sympathetic smile. She had prosecuted hundreds of cases, but she always tried to be gentle with child witnesses. She knew how traumatic this could be for them. And at any point that night did you wake up? Ms. asked. This was it. This was the first lie. Maya's mouth went dry. She could feel sweat forming on her palms, and she pressed them flat against the edge of the witness stand to hide her trembling. No, she said, I didn't wake up. The word hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that seemed to spread through the entire courtroom. Maya's heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst out of her chest. She had just lied, under oath, in a courtroom. She was going to go to prison. She was certain of it. Surely everyone could see right through her. Surely they all knew she was lying. But no one seemed to notice. Ms. continued, making notes on her legal pad, seemingly satisfied with the answer. So you slept through the entire night without waking? Yes, Maya said, and this lie came easier than the first one, though it felt like poison coating her tongue. I slept the whole night. In the gallery, she caught her mother's micro-expression of relief. It was so brief that a casual observer might have missed it, but Maya had been living with her mother's anxiety for weeks. She had learned to read every subtle shift in his face. Ms. continued with her questioning, establishing the timeline that had been planned beforehand. Maya gave practiced answers about the neighborhood being quiet, about her mother checking on her in the night, about nothing unusual happening. Each answer was technically truthful or carefully constructed to be misleading without being an outright lie, a distinction that meant nothing to her guilty conscience. Then came the cross-examination. The defense attorney, a man named Richard with silver hair and a reputation for aggressive courtroom tactics, stood and approached the stand like a predator sensing weakness. "Now, Maya," he began, his voice dripping with a faux friendliness that made her skin crawl, "you're a very smart girl, aren't you?" I guess so," Maya stammered. "And you're familiar with the meaning of the word truth, correct? You understand what it means to tell the truth?" Maya's hands trembled. "Yes." "And you understand that you took an oath today to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "Yes," Maya whispered. "So if you were to see something that night, something important, you would tell this court about it, wouldn't you? Because you took an oath." This was a trap. Maya could feel it like a physical thing. If she said yes, she was claiming she would have reported what she saw. If she said no, she was admitting she would lie under oath. I would tell the truth," she managed. Smiled, and it was the smile of a shark. "But you didn't see anything that night, did you? Because you were asleep the entire time. That's what you just told us. So there was nothing to tell the truth about, nothing to report." "That's right," Maya said, but her voice had become so small that she could barely hear herself. The jury was watching her intently now. She could see several of them exchange glances with each other. One older woman with gray hair and kind eyes was studying Maya with an expression that looked suspiciously like recognition, like she could see through the lie. Continued for another 10 minutes, asking the same questions in different ways, trying to trip her up or get her to contradict herself. But Maya had rehearsed this story so many times with her mother that the lies came automatically now, each one building on the last, creating a structure of deception that felt increasingly unstable, like a house of cards in a hurricane. When finally released her from the stand, Maya's entire body was trembling. She had done it. She had lied. She had helped put Mr. in the position of defendant, and she had hidden the truth about her brother. But as she walked back toward the gallery, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. Because the truth was this. On the night of March 15th, Maya had woken up at 2:17 a.m. She had been thirsty. The kitchen was dark and cool, and she had gone to the sink for a glass of water. That's when she saw them through the window, two figures moving quickly down the side street. One of them was definitely Daniel. She knew his gait, the way he moved, the shape of his hoodie. The other figure was taller, more muscular, with what looked like a crowbar in his hand. They had disappeared around the corner, and 5 minutes later the sirens started. Within an hour, the news was reporting the break-in. Mistress was on television within 24 hours. Her mother had come to her room that morning, sat on the edge of her bed, and her hands had been shaking so badly that she could barely hold Maya's face in her palms. "Did you see anything last night?" had asked, and the way she asked it, the desperate hope mixed with terror, told Maya everything she needed to know. Her mother already suspected that Maya had seen something. I heard sirens," Maya had said cautiously. "But you didn't see anything. You didn't see who went down the street." It wasn't a question. It was a command disguised as a question. "No," Maya had lied for the first time. "I didn't see anything." Had pulled her daughter into her arms and held her so tightly that Maya could barely breathe. She had whispered into Maya's hair, thank God you didn't see. Because Daniel, oh God, Maya, Daniel was out last night, and the police are asking questions, and if anyone thinks he was involved. The implication was clear. If Daniel was arrested, their family would be destroyed. Their father had left years ago. Their mother worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Daniel was on the precipice of losing himself to drugs and bad influences, and one arrest might push him completely over the edge. And if the police suspected Daniel, they would dig deeper. They would find evidence. They would destroy him. So when her mother laid out the plan, stay quiet about what you saw, say you were sleeping, help us establish reasonable doubt about Mr., it had felt like the only option, like the lesser of 2 evils. But now, sitting in the gallery after giving her testimony, Maya understood the weight of what she had done. Somewhere in that building, Mr. was facing life imprisonment for a crime he didn't commit, and she had helped put him there. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand, a gesture meant to be congratulatory. But all Maya could feel was the crushing weight of her lie, pressing down on her chest like a physical force, making it hard to breathe, making her skin feel too tight for her body. She caught sight of a police officer in the back of the courtroom, and she wondered if he could see her guilt written across her face like a scarlet letter. She wondered how long she could maintain this lie before it consumed her entirely. And she thought about Buddy, waiting somewhere in the bowels of the courthouse, probably wondering where she was, probably sensing her distress the way he always did. Buddy, who had been trained to recognize when people were in emotional distress. Buddy, who loved her unconditionally, even though she had just lied under oath. She didn't know it yet, but that loyal dog was going to become the instrument of her salvation, because soon enough her guilt would become impossible to hide. And when it did, everything would change. The courtroom doors had barely closed behind Maya when she heard Richard's voice again, sharp and predatory. The cross-examination wasn't over. It had merely paused for lunch. Now, as afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall courtroom windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, the real attack was about to begin. Maya had spent the lunch hour in a small room with her mother and a victim's advocate, picking at a sandwich she couldn't taste. Her stomach felt like it was filled with broken glass. The advocate, a kind woman named Mrs. Wilson, had tried to prepare her for what was coming. Mr. might ask you the same questions over and over, Mrs. Wilson had explained. He's trying to catch you in a mistake. If you get confused or change your answer even slightly, he'll use that to suggest you're lying. Just stay calm and remember, you've done nothing wrong. You're telling the truth. But that was the problem. Maya wasn't telling the truth. And with each repetition, with each slightly different angle of questioning, the weight of that lie seemed to grow heavier. Now, as stood and approached the witness stand again, Maya's hands began to shake so violently that she had to sit on them to hide the trembling. Silver hair gleamed under the courtroom lights as he smiled at her, and that smile was worse than any anger could have been. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed the hunt. "Now, Maya, let's go back to March 15th, began, his voice dripping with false concern. "You said you were sleeping the entire night, correct?" "Yes," Maya whispered. "But 8-year-old children often wake up during the night, don't they? For bathroom breaks, for water, for nightmares." Maya's heart began to race. This was a trap. If she said yes, he would ask why she didn't wake up that night. If she said no, she would sound unbelievable. "Sometimes," she managed. "So it's possible you could have woken up that night, isn't it? It's possible you could have gotten up for a glass of water and just forgot about it." "No, I definitely didn't wake up," Maya said, but her voice was climbing higher in pitch, becoming more desperate. She could see several jurors lean forward, their faces showing increasing skepticism. "You're very certain about that, aren't you?" "Very, very certain. Despite the fact that 8-year-olds regularly don't remember waking during the night." "I didn't wake up," Maya repeated, and now her eyes were beginning to fill with tears. She hated herself for crying. Crying made her look weak, made her look like she was lying. but she couldn't help it. The pressure was building inside her like steam in a sealed pot, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold it in. Pressed forward, relentless. And your bedroom window, it faces the side street, doesn't it? The same side street where the defendant was allegedly seen. Yes, Maya said, and this answer was honest, which made everything worse. So if you had woken up and looked out that window, you would have had a clear view of the street, wouldn't you? I guess so, Maya whispered. But you didn't wake up, so you didn't look out the window, so you didn't see anything. He was boxing her in, and Maya could feel the walls closing in. The courtroom seemed to be getting smaller, the air getting thinner. She was having trouble breathing. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges. That's right, she said, but her voice had become so strained that she sounded like a different person, a person on the verge of breaking. For another 15 minutes asked variations of the same questions, attacking the story from different angles. Did she ever wake up? Could she have woken up? Might she have forgotten if she woke up? Was she sure? Was she absolutely sure? Could she be mistaken? Wasn't it possible she was confused? With each question, Maya felt a piece of herself being chipped away. The lies that had felt solid this morning were beginning to crack and crumble. She wanted to scream. She wanted to jump down from the witness stand and run out of this courtroom and never come back. She wanted to go back in time and tell the truth from the beginning. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. Her chest felt tight. The room was spinning slightly, and she gripped the edge of the witness stand so hard that her knuckles turned white. She could see her mother in the gallery, and for the first time, its expression showed fear. She recognized the signs of a complete breakdown. Your Honor stood up. My daughter is. Sit down, Judge commanded, not unkindly but firmly. The judge was studying Maya with those penetrating eyes, and Maya realized with a jolt of panic that the judge could see everything. The judge could see right through her. The judge knew she was lying. Pressed on. One more thing, Maya. You understand what it means to lie under oath, correct? You understand that's illegal. Yes, Maya whispered, and the word came out like a confession. And you would never do that, would you? You would never lie in court. And that was when something inside Maya broke. A sob erupted from her chest, a sound so raw and desperate that several people in the gallery gasped. Tears streamed down her face. Her whole body was shaking now, violent tremors that she couldn't control. I can't. She tried to speak but couldn't form the words. Judge leaned forward. We need to take a recess. Mister, step back. Young lady, do you need water? Do you need to take a moment? But Maya wasn't listening anymore. She was spiraling. The courtroom was closing in on her. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could feel was the crushing weight of her guilt and her lie and her fear and her desperate need to tell the truth before it destroyed her completely. That's when her training kicked in. Through the fog of her panic, through the crushing anxiety, she remembered what her therapist had taught her. In moments of extreme distress, when words failed, there was a signal, a gesture, a way to call for help from the one being in this courtroom who loved her unconditionally and could sense her emotional state better than anyone else. Her right hand came up to her ear almost involuntarily. Her index and middle fingers touched her earlobe, then swept downward in a smooth, practiced motion. It was barely noticeable, just a small gesture that looked like she was brushing hair out of her face. But it was a message, a secret language between her and her best friend. The bailiff started to move toward her, perhaps to offer assistance. But before anyone could react, there was a sound from the back of the courtroom. A sharp, sudden bark. Buddy's bark. Not aggressive, not chaotic, but distinctive, purposeful. 3 barks, crisp and clear, echoing through the courtroom. A pause, then 3 more. The entire room went silent. Even Judge, the stern and unflappable judge, froze. Her eyes went wide. Her face drained of color. She straightened in her chair, her hand moving instinctively toward her gavel. Because that bark pattern, that specific 3-bark sequence, She recognized it. Years ago, before becoming a judge, she had trained service animals herself. That particular alert pattern was specialized. That pattern meant something specific. That pattern was used to signal deception or severe emotional distress in a witness. The courtroom erupted in confused murmurs. Reporters leaned forward. Jury members turned to each other with bewildered expressions. But Judge's eyes locked onto Maya, and in that moment everything changed. "Bailiff," Judge said, her voice sharp and commanding, "remove the dog carefully, and we're taking a 30-minute recess. I want Maya Richardson, her mother Richardson, and both counsel in my chambers, immediately." As Buddy was led away, still whimpering softly, still trying to communicate his distress, Maya understood that something extraordinary had just happened. Her loyal dog, the one being in this world who loved her most, had just told the truth for her. And somehow, Judge had understood. The nightmare was far from over. But in that moment, a small spark of hope flickered to life in Maya's broken heart. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry this lie alone anymore. Judge had been on the bench for 31 years. She had presided over 3,000 cases. She had sent murderers to prison and freed innocent people wrongly accused. She had seen the best of human nature and the absolute worst. She prided herself on her ability to read people, to sense when something wasn't adding up, to recognize the subtle tells that separated truth from fiction. But in all her years, nothing had ever hit her quite like that bark pattern. The moment she heard it, 3 sharp, deliberate barks followed by a precise pause and then 3 more. Judge's entire body went rigid. Her hand, which had been resting on her desk, involuntarily gripped the armrest of her chair. The color drained from her face as a flood of memories rushed back, memories she hadn't thought about in over a decade. She had been 32 years old, freshly out of law school, taking a break from her legal career to reassess her life goals. She had volunteered at a service animal training facility, ostensibly to help with administrative work. But she had become fascinated by the animals themselves, by their intelligence, their ability to read human emotion with an accuracy that rivaled most humans. She had spent 18 months studying animal behavior, working with trainers, learning how dogs could be conditioned to recognize and alert to specific human states. One of her most significant discoveries had been the alert patterns, specific bark sequences that signaled different conditions. 3 barks, pause, 3 barks was used to alert handlers to acute emotional distress or deception in a subject. It was a pattern that worked across different situations because the dog was trained to recognize the physical manifestations of stress. Rapid heartbeat, adrenaline spike, changes in scent, alterations in breathing patterns. Had even written a paper on it, published in an obscure veterinary psychology journal. But that knowledge had been filed away in the back of her mind when she returned to her legal career. She had never expected to hear that pattern again in a courtroom. Now, watching that terrified 8-year-old girl with tears streaming down her face, understood with absolute clarity what was happening. That child wasn't lying about being confused or uncertain. That child was lying about something fundamental, something that was tearing her apart from the inside out. "Bailiff's voice cut through the confused murmuring in the courtroom like a knife. "Remove the dog, carefully, and we're taking a 30-minute recess. I want Maya Richardson, her mother Richardson, and both counsel in my chambers, immediately." As the bailiff carefully led Buddy away, the dog, still whimpering, still trying to communicate, felt a surge of righteous anger. She had encountered enough injustice in her career to recognize it in any form, and if that little girl was being coerced into lying under oath, that was a travesty that would not tolerate in her courtroom. She stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward and hitting the wall behind her bench with a loud crack. The sound drew the attention of everyone in the courtroom. This was so unlike Judge. She was known for her composure, her measured demeanor, her unflappable judicial presence. But in this moment, As she stepped down from her bench and headed toward her chambers, there was barely contained fury in every line of her body. Her chambers were located just off the courtroom, a spacious office lined with legal books, framed photographs of her family, and a large mahogany desk that had belonged to the previous judge. Gestured sharply for everyone to enter and then closed the door behind them. She didn't offer anyone a seat. She remained standing, her hands braced on her desk, and studied each person in turn. Richardson looked like a woman on the verge of a complete breakdown. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking, and her eyes darted between the door and her daughter like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. Maya sat rigidly on the edge of a chair, still crying silently, her whole body trembling with tension and fear. Richard, the defense attorney, looked confused and slightly annoyed at the interruption. "Your Honor, I'm not sure what this is about, but—" held up her hand, silencing him. Her gray eyes, sharp and unforgiving, moved too. "Ms. Richardson, I'm going to ask you directly, and I suggest you think very carefully about your answer. Is your daughter telling the truth about what she witnessed that night?" His face went even paler. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Your Honor, I don't think you can." "I can and I am," interrupted coldly. "Answer the question, is your daughter telling the truth?" The silence that followed was deafening. Could practically hear his heart racing, could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. This was a woman caught in an impossible position, but had no sympathy, not when a potential miscarriage of justice was at stake. "Your Honor," Sarah, the prosecutor, spoke up. "What's going on? What did that dog alert to?" Turned her piercing gaze to the prosecutor. That dog just indicated acute emotional distress and possible deception in the witness. The alert pattern was unmistakable. "I've seen it before, and I recognize what it means." She turned back to, "Ms. Richardson, do you understand what perjury is? Do you understand that coaching a child into lying under oath carries significant criminal penalties? Do you understand that if an innocent man is convicted based on false testimony, that's a miscarriage of justice?" His entire frame seemed to collapse inward, her shoulders hunched, her chin dropped to her chest. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I was trying to protect." "Protect whom?" asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew the answer. "My son," said, and the words came out like a confession ripped from her soul. "My other son, Daniel." Nodded slowly. She had suspected it might be a family member. The kind of lie that would devastate a child like Maya was usually built on family loyalty, on the desperate desire to protect someone you loved. "Tell me what really happened," commanded, and this wasn't a request. This was judicial authority speaking. This was a woman who had the power to send people to prison, and everyone in this room understood that. Looked at her daughter, and the expression of shame and regret on her face was absolutely genuine. She had been so focused on protecting Daniel that she had sacrificed her youngest child's psychological well-being. She had turned an 8-year-old into a perjurer. She had put an innocent man at risk of lifetime imprisonment. "I can't," started but cut her off. "You can and you will. Because if you don't, I'm going to charge you with child abuse, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit perjury. And I'm going to make sure your case is prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Your son will lose his mother. Your daughter will lose her mother. Your entire family will be destroyed. But if you tell me the truth right now, I can help you. I can offer you a path forward that doesn't involve prison time and doesn't involve your children being placed in foster care. So you choose, complete honesty or complete destruction." His face crumpled. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. She looked at Maya and could see the moment when she made her decision, the moment when she chose to finally tell the truth. "It was Daniel," said, her voice breaking. "My son Daniel was there that night. He saw what happened. He saw who really committed the crime, but the perpetrator threatened him, threatened to kill him. Daniel was terrified, so he stayed silent. And I I was so afraid of losing my son that I made Maya lie to protect Daniel. I told her Mister wasn't innocent but that Daniel needed protecting more. Listened to the entire confession, and when finished, the judge sat down slowly in her leather chair. She interlaced her fingers on the desk in front of her and studied the three people before her: a frightened mother, a traumatized child, and the wreckage of a family destroyed by fear. "This ends today," said quietly but with absolute finality. "You're going to tell me everything: who Daniel saw, what he witnessed, what threats were made, and then you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it. Do you understand?" Nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Looked at Maya and her expression softened slightly. "And you, young lady, were very brave today. Your dog showed more courage than most adults ever will. You're going to be okay. I promise you that." As pressed her intercom to call her secretary and begin documenting everything was about to reveal, she couldn't help but think about that remarkable dog in the hallway. Buddy had done what no human legal strategy could have accomplished. That dog had spoken truth to power in the only language he knew. And somehow that truth had been heard. Judge Chambers seemed to grow smaller with each confession that spilled from Richardson's lips. The walls, lined with law books and decades of judicial precedent, seemed to close in as a desperate mother finally released the burden of lies she had been carrying. Sat motionless behind her mahogany desk, her hands folded, her expression unreadable, while her mind raced through the legal implications of everything being revealed. Had begun hesitantly, her voice barely audible, but as the words continued to pour out, they came faster, more frantically, like water breaking through a dam. The story that emerged was one of fear, desperation, and a mother's misguided attempt to protect her child at any cost. "Daniel was out that night because he was supposed to meet someone," explained, wringing her hands. "A friend. Someone he'd gotten involved with. I didn't know at the time what they were planning. I just knew he snuck out around 1:45 a.m. I was awake. I'm always awake when he's out, watching for him to come back. Then at 2:15 I heard sirens. Lots of them." She paused, taking a shaky breath, remained silent, letting continue at her own pace. The prosecutor and defense attorney stood on either side of the chambers, observers to this family tragedy, understanding that they were witnessing something that would fundamentally alter the case. "The next morning the police were asking questions in the neighborhood," continued. "They had arrested someone, mister, and I thought, thank God they have someone, thank God it's not Daniel. But then Daniel came to me and he was terrified, absolutely terrified. He said he'd been there, he'd seen everything. And the man who actually did it, the man who hurt that homeowner, he had threatened Daniel." "Threatened him how?" asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Said he'd kill him if he went to the police," whispered. "Said he'd burn our house down with us inside it. Said he knew where Daniel went to school, knew where I worked. This man is dangerous, Your Honor. He's connected to drug dealers. He has a history of violence. Daniel believed the threats. I believed the threats." Leaned back in her chair, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel something other than judicial detachment. She could see the genuine terror in his eyes. This wasn't a woman making excuses. This was a woman who had been paralyzed by fear for her child's safety. But that didn't change what had happened. "So you decided to have your 8-year-old daughter lie under oath," said, and her tone was not accusatory, but rather a simple statement of fact that somehow cut deeper than anger ever could. Flinched as if she'd been struck. "I didn't know what else to do. If Daniel, he would be in danger. The threats were very specific, and if he didn't testify, Mister might be convicted anyway. I thought maybe if Maya said she didn't see anything, it would create reasonable doubt. I thought maybe the jury would realize they didn't have enough evidence. I thought maybe everyone could be safe." "You thought wrong," said quietly. She stood and walked to the window of her chambers, looking out over the Columbus skyline. The autumn afternoon was fading into evening, and the buildings were beginning to light up against the darkening sky. "You put a child through psychological trauma. You coached her to commit perjury. You potentially allowed an innocent man to be convicted of a serious crime, and you did all of this based on threats from a criminal. She turned back to face. Those threats, Ms. Richardson, did you report them to the police? His face went even paler. No, I was afraid they wouldn't protect Daniel. I was afraid of what the criminal would do if he found out Daniel had reported him. So you never contacted law enforcement about direct threats against your son's life? Eyebrows rose. You never contacted victim services. You never sought a protective order. I was scared, said, and her voice broke completely. I didn't think. I just reacted. I was trying to keep my family together, and instead I've destroyed everything. Remained silent for a long moment, letting sit with the weight of that realization. Then she pressed her intercom. Get me detective from the Columbus Police Department, commanded. Tell him I need to speak with him immediately regarding a witness protection matter and a potential criminal threat. She turned back to, here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me the name of this man, the man who threatened your son, every detail you remember about him, his appearance, his connections, where he might be found. And then we're going to work with law enforcement to ensure your family receives proper protection. Real protection. Protection that doesn't involve sacrificing your children's futures. But if I give them his name, he'll know it was Daniel. He may suspect it, interrupted. But what he won't do is harm Daniel, because Daniel will be under police protection, because there will be consequences for any retaliation, because the law, Ms. Richardson, actually has mechanisms for protecting people who do the right thing, mechanisms you were too frightened to use. Nodded slowly, and could see the moment when hope began to creep back into her expression. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this nightmare that didn't involve everyone going to prison. Sarah, the prosecutor, stepped forward. Your Honor, what about the charges against Mr.? The case against him falls apart if Maya recants her testimony. The charges against Mr. will be dismissed, said firmly. His attorney will file a motion, you'll agree to it, and we'll move on to finding the real perpetrator. But more importantly, we need to bring Daniel Richardson in and find out exactly what he witnessed. He may be the key to identifying and prosecuting the person who actually committed this crime. Richard, the defense attorney, spoke up for the first time. Your Honor, I have to ask, are you aware that you're essentially forcing a confession from the mother? This could be seen as coercion. Turned her sharp gaze to him. I'm offering her a choice between criminal prosecution and cooperation. That's not coercion, mister. That's justice. And unless you'd like me to add your name to the list of people facing charges for obstructing justice, I suggest you focus on preparing Mr. for his release. The attorney wisely stepped back. His attention shifted to Maya, who had remained silent throughout the entire conversation, her small frame curled into itself on the chair. The judge walked around her desk and knelt down so she was at eye level with the child. Maya said softly, I want you to know that what happened here today is not your fault. Your mother made choices. You were following your mother's instructions. You were afraid. That doesn't make you a bad person. That makes you a child who was put in an impossible situation by the adults around you. Maya's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed like tears of relief rather than terror. What's going to happen to my mom? Maya asked, her voice small and fragile. Your mother is going to cooperate with the police, explained. She's going to help us keep you safe, and she's going to help us find the man who really hurt that homeowner. There will be consequences. There always are when you break the law. But if she does the right thing now, the consequences won't be as severe as they could have been. Stood and pressed her intercom again. I also want someone from Child Protective Services in here. We need to assess whether this child requires counseling, and we need to establish a safety plan for the entire family. As the afternoon wore on and various officials began arriving in chambers, detectives, social workers, advocates, the full scope of what had happened became clear. Daniel Richardson was brought in and gave a detailed account of witnessing the crime. He identified the perpetrator as a 34-year-old with a violent criminal history. He described the threats in vivid detail. He explained how fear had paralyzed him into silence. By 7 p.m., a warrant had been issued for his arrest. By 8 p.m., he was in custody. And by 9 p.m., judge was drafting the order to dismiss all charges against Richard. As typed the order, she found herself thinking about that remarkable golden retriever. That dog had accomplished what thousands of dollars in legal fees might not have been able to do. That dog had spoken to something deeper than facts and testimony. That dog had communicated truth itself. She made a mental note to personally thank the animal's owner and trainer. And she began to think about how this case might change the way courts considered the role of service animals in judicial proceedings. Because if one dog could save an innocent man from prison, imagine what it meant for the entire justice system to finally acknowledge the wisdom that animals possessed. Wisdom about human truth that transcended words, that reached into the very essence of deception and pain and fear. The law thought should learn to listen to such voices. The Columbus Police Department's interrogation room was deliberately sparse and cold. Gray walls, a metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner documenting every moment. Detective James, no relation to the defense attorney, sat across from, a muscular man with dead eyes and prison tattoos covering his arms. His public defender sat beside him, a nervous young attorney named who was quickly realizing that his client was in far deeper trouble than anyone had anticipated. On the other side of the two-way glass, Judge watched with Detective Sarah Williams, the lead investigator on the original break-in case. The judge had stepped outside her normal judicial role to observe this interrogation personally, an unusual move, but had already bent several procedural rules today in the pursuit of actual justice. "So you're denying any involvement in the March 15th break-in?" Detective asked, his voice flat and practiced. "I want my lawyer," said, but there was something in his voice that suggested he already knew the game was over. "Your lawyer is right here," said, "and we've got a problem. We have a witness, a young man who saw you commit the crime. He saw you enter the residence at 2:22 a.m. He saw you assault the homeowner. He heard you make specific threats to him about keeping quiet, and he's willing to testify to all of it." His face didn't change, but could see his jaw clench slightly. That was confirmation enough. "We also found forensic evidence at your residence that matches the crime scene," continued. "Fibers from the victim's clothing, the weapon you used, and we've recovered financial records showing you received a payment from an associate 2 days after the crime, payment for services rendered." The defense attorney leaned over and whispered something to, who shook his head impatiently. "My client has nothing to say without a deal," the attorney finally said. "There's no deal," detective said flatly. "Not for home invasion, aggravated assault, and criminal threat. Those charges are going to stick. But here's the interesting part. We're also looking at witness intimidation. You threatened a minor. You threatened a family. You told that kid you'd burn down their house and kill everyone in it. Do you understand how seriously that's taken?" His face finally showed a crack. His lawyer was rapidly typing on his laptop, pulling up sentencing guidelines, realizing that his client was looking at potentially 15 to 20 years in prison. Watched with a grim sense of satisfaction. Justice, she thought, was finally moving in the right direction. Meanwhile, in the courthouse hallway, a press conference was being prepared. Sarah, the prosecutor, stood with Richard and his attorney, both men looking shell-shocked but relieved. The reporters had already gotten wind that something significant had happened in the case, and they were practically vibrating with anticipation. "We are announcing the dismissal of all charges against Richard," Sarah declared to the assembled media. "Evidence has come to light that indicates Mr. was not involved in the March 15th break-in. We have identified another suspect. who is currently in custody and will be facing charges including home invasion, aggravated assault, and criminal threat. The reporters erupted in questions, but held up her hand. I'm not going to take questions today, but I will say this. There was a breakdown in the investigation process. We made assumptions that led us in the wrong direction. A miscarriage of justice was prevented today by the intervention of a service animal whose behavioral alert indicated that a witness was under severe duress. This case will serve as an important reminder that our judicial system must remain flexible and open to all forms of evidence, including the intuitive wisdom that our animals can provide. Richard stepped forward, visibly emotional. I want to thank the court, judge specifically, for her diligence in uncovering the truth. I also want to thank the Richardson family for their bravery in coming forward. This has been the most difficult period of my life, but I'm grateful that justice has prevailed. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted follow-up questions, made eye contact with a young woman standing at the back of the press area. It was Maya, accompanied by her mother and a social worker. Richardson had agreed to stand beside her youngest daughter as a symbol of their family's commitment to truth, despite the personal cost. At Columbus Police Headquarters, Daniel Richardson was giving his formal statement to Detective Williams. The 17-year-old was visibly shaken, but he spoke with clarity and conviction. His testimony was devastating to his defense. He said if I told anyone he would find me, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the obvious fear underlying it. He said he had people watching our house. He said he would burn it down with my family inside. He showed me pictures of our address. He knew my school. He knew where my mom worked. I was terrified. I am terrified, but I couldn't let an innocent man go to prison. Detective Williams leaned forward. You're being very brave, Daniel. I want you to know that you made the right choice, and the police department will be providing your family with protection services until Mr. is no longer a threat. Daniel nodded, and the weight on his young shoulders seemed to shift slightly. He wasn't carrying this burden alone anymore. The next morning, news of the case had exploded across Columbus. The local stations led with headlines about the wrongful arrest, the service dog's intervention, and the arrest of the real perpetrator. By afternoon, the story had spread to regional news networks. By evening, it was trending on national news channels. Columbus service dog alerts judge to perjury in landmark case. Read one headline. Innocent man freed after golden retriever's behavioral alert uncovers family conspiracy. Read another. How one dog's bark changed the course of justice, proclaimed a third. The story captured the public imagination because it was, in many ways, a perfect narrative. An innocent man wrongly accused, a terrified child forced into lying, a family torn apart by threats and fear, and then a dog, a loyal, loving dog who somehow, through training and instinct and an unbreakable bond with a child, had communicated truth in a way that no human argument could have. Animal behaviorists began appearing on television, discussing the sophistication of service dog training and the remarkable accuracy of behavioral alert patterns. Universities requested the case files for study. Legal scholars started writing papers about the implications for the judicial system. But perhaps most significantly, the story inspired a conversation about witness protection, about the proper procedures for handling threats against potential witnesses, and about the failures of the system that had left Richardson so desperate and afraid that she felt forced to have her child commit perjury. In a small courtroom 3 weeks later, a new hearing was called. Judge presided, and this hearing would determine the consequences Richardson would face for her role in coaching Maya to lie under oath. The judge listened as attorneys argued, as psychologists about the extreme stress had been under, as social workers explained the family's history of trauma and instability. And then Judge delivered her ruling. Ms. Richardson will face probation for her role in this matter, announced. However, given her cooperation with law enforcement, given her genuine remorse, and given the extreme circumstances that led to her actions, specifically, the very real threats made against her minor son, I am recommending a suspended sentence rather than incarceration. She will complete 200 hours of community service, will participate in family counseling, and will work with victim services to ensure her family receives proper protection and support. Paused, then added, however, let the record show that this outcome would not have been possible without her willingness to tell the truth when confronted with evidence. Parents who choose to have their children lie under oath in the future should know that the consequences will be far more severe. This case represents a family given a second chance because they ultimately chose the right path. Richardson wept openly in the courtroom, tears of relief mixed with lingering guilt. But her family was still intact. Daniel was safe. Maya was beginning therapy to process her trauma. And Mr., the man who had nearly been destroyed by false testimony, was beginning his own journey toward healing. As left the courtroom that afternoon, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. In the hallway, Richard stood talking with Richardson. They were discussing financial support, had decided to establish a legal defense fund that would help other families threatened into silence. The system failed your family, said Tu, but you fixed it. You chose truth. The least I can do is make sure other families don't face the same choice. Smiled. The law, she thought, was finally working the way it was supposed to work, and it had taken a dog to make it happen. The morning after the national news picked up the story, Buddy's life changed forever. He didn't know it yet, of course. He only knew that his favorite person, little Maya, had come to visit him at the facility where he was being temporarily housed while lawyers and social workers sorted out custody arrangements. She had wrapped her arms around his neck and cried into his fur, and he had done what he always did. He had comforted her, pressing his massive head against her chest, his tail wagging gently. But outside the facility, the world was going crazy. The morning news shows had run segments on Buddy. Morning television personalities were discussing the remarkable intelligence of service dogs. Animal behaviorists were being interviewed about the sophistication of behavioral alert training. Within 12 hours, Buddy's story had been picked up by every major news outlet in the country. Within 24 hours, it was international. Buddy was trending on social media. There were hashtags, Buddy the Hero, Dog Justice, Service Dog Saves Innocent. Buddy's trainer, Dr. Michael Foster, found himself fielding calls from media outlets, academic institutions, and animal welfare organizations. He appeared on Good Morning America, discussing the specific training that had enabled Buddy to alert to Maya's emotional distress. He appeared on NPR, explaining the science behind service animal behavioral patterns. He was interviewed for a segment on 60 Minutes, where he demonstrated Buddy's alert sequence on camera. The remarkable thing about Buddy, Dr. Foster explained to the 60 Minutes correspondent, is that he wasn't trained specifically to alert to perjury. He was trained to recognize acute emotional distress in Maya, but that distress was caused by the conflict between what she was being told to say and what she knew to be true. Buddy recognized that conflict. He recognized her suffering, and he communicated it the only way he knew how. The segment aired on a Sunday night and was watched by over 12 million viewers. By Monday morning, Buddy was being offered opportunities that most dogs could never dream of. A major production company wanted to make a documentary about his story. A publisher wanted to commission a children's book about the case. An animal welfare organization wanted to use Buddy as the face of a national campaign to increase service dog programs in courtrooms. A university offered to name a new animal behavior research center after him. But perhaps most significantly, Judge began receiving requests from other courts across the country. Judges wanted to know how to implement similar protocols. They wanted to understand how service animals might be incorporated into their judicial systems. A movement began, slow at first, but gradually gaining momentum, to formally recognize the role that animals could play in the pursuit of justice. Gave talks at judicial conferences. She published papers in legal journals. She worked with animal behaviorists to develop standardized protocols for service animal behavioral alerts in courtrooms. Within 6 months, 3 other states had adopted versions of the Richardson Protocol. Within a year, 10 states had implemented it. By the end of 2 years, it was being discussed in law schools across the country as a case study in innovative judicial procedure. Meanwhile, Buddy's life took on a surreal quality. He was photographed for magazine covers. Major newspapers ran feature stories about him. He appeared in commercials for a national animal welfare organization. He received commendations from multiple animal protection agencies. The American Kennel Club honored him with a special award for service to justice. But through it all, Buddy remained a dog. He loved his daily walks. He enjoyed playing fetch. He was happiest when he was with Maya, who visited him as often as she could. The handlers and trainers at the facility noticed something remarkable about their most famous resident. He showed no signs of ego, no arrogance, no awareness that he had become a celebrity. He treated everyone with the same gentle loyalty, the same unconditional love that had always been his nature. Dr. Foster noticed something else about Buddy, too. The dog seemed to have developed an even deeper connection with Maya since the case had concluded. It was as if Buddy understood on some fundamental level that he and the little girl had been through something extraordinary together. They had shared a moment of truth that had changed multiple lives. That bond transcended the normal service dog-handler relationship. It was something deeper, something sacred. Buddy saved her, Dr. Foster told a reporter during one interview. And in doing so, he saved an innocent man. He saved her family. He prevented a miscarriage of justice. But here's what I think is most remarkable. Buddy didn't do this because he was trying to be a hero. He did it because he loved Maya. He communicated her distress because he couldn't bear to see her suffering. And that, I think, is the most important lesson of this entire case. Justice doesn't come from grand gestures or complicated legal strategies. It comes from genuine love, from the willingness to speak truth even when it's difficult, from the courage to communicate what we see, even if no one is listening. Buddy taught us all that lesson. Richard, the man who had almost gone to prison, became one of Buddy's greatest champions. He established the Buddy and Beyond Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to training and placing service animals in courtrooms across the country. Used his own financial settlement to fund the initiative, dedicating the rest of his life to ensuring that what happened to him would never happen to anyone else. "I owe Buddy my life," said at the foundation's inaugural gala. "I owe him my freedom. I owe him everything. This foundation exists because a remarkable dog had the courage to communicate a truth that humans had missed. We're going to make sure that other dogs get the opportunity to do the same. We're going to train them, place them, support them, and most importantly, we're going to teach the legal system to listen to them." The foundation attracted significant donations. Within 2 years, it had placed over 50 trained service dogs in courtrooms across 15 states. Within 5 years, that number had grown to over 200. For Maya, the attention surrounding Buddy was overwhelming at first, but it gradually became therapeutic. She began to understand that her pain, the trauma she had experienced, the impossible choice she had been forced to make, had ultimately led to something positive. It had led to justice. It had led to systemic change. It had led to the creation of tools and protocols that would help other children in similar situations. With the support of a trauma therapist and the constant presence of Buddy, Maya began to heal. The guilt she carried for her initial lie gradually transformed into something more productive, a determination to use her experience to help others. At age 10, she began giving talks at schools about honesty, about the courage it takes to tell the truth, and about the unexpected heroes who help us find our way. Buddy didn't know he was saving an innocent man, Maya would tell audiences of her peers. He just knew I was scared and hurting, and that was enough, that was everything. Because when we speak truth about pain, when we communicate what we see and what we feel, amazing things can happen. Bad people can be stopped. Good people can be freed. families can heal, and the world can become a little bit more just. Children would sit in rapt attention as this small girl with clear, intelligent eyes told them about the night everything changed, about the courtroom, about Buddy's barks, about the power of telling the truth, about how an 8-year-old and a golden retriever had accidentally changed the justice system. On the 2-year anniversary of the case, a special ceremony was held at the Columbus courthouse. Judge presided over a gathering that included Richard, the Richardson family, Dr. Michael Foster, and of course, Buddy himself. News crews from around the country covered the event. 2 years ago, Judge said, addressing the assembled crowd, we witnessed something remarkable in this courthouse. We witnessed the intersection of law and animal intelligence. We witnessed a child's suffering being recognized and communicated by a being who loved her. And we witnessed justice prevailing because we were willing to listen to an unexpected voice. She paused, looking directly at Buddy, who sat regally beside Maya, his tail wagging gently. Buddy, the judge continued, this court recognizes you as an instrument of justice. Your presence and your actions have fundamentally changed how we approach witness testimony and credibility in our judicial system. You have made our courts safer, fairer, and more just. On behalf of the people of Ohio, on behalf of everyone who believes in the power of truth, I thank you. The crowd erupted in applause. Buddy's tail wagged faster and he leaned his head against Maya's leg. He didn't understand the applause. He didn't comprehend that he had become famous. He only knew that his girl was happy. That was enough. That was everything. And as the cameras flashed and the reporters crowded forward, capturing the moment for the world to see, Buddy remained calm, centered, present. He was exactly what he had always been, a dog who loved unconditionally, who saw truth clearly, and who had somehow found his way into history. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn morning that reminded of the day that had changed everything, she stood in the auditorium of Ohio State University's newly opened Center for Animal Intelligence and Judicial Reform. The building itself was a testament to how far the ripples from that single courtroom moment had spread. Major donors had contributed millions. Universities across the country had begun similar programs. And at the heart of it all was a simple, profound truth. Animals had something important to teach us about justice, truth, and the human condition. Looked out at the assembled crowd, law students, animal behaviorists, judges from across the country, journalists, and a collection of service dogs in training. This was her 5th year giving the keynote address at the annual conference dedicated to service animals and judicial reform. She had become something of a figurehead for this movement, though she would always insist that the real hero was a golden retriever who had simply loved a child enough to communicate her pain. When we talk about the Richardson case, began, her voice carrying through the auditorium with the authority of someone who had spent 3 decades commanding courtrooms, we often focus on the moment of Buddy's alert. We focus on the dramatic bark pattern that changed everything. But I want to talk today about what came after, about what we as a society learned from that moment and how we've chosen to grow. She clicked to the first slide, which showed statistics about service animals now placed in courtrooms across the United States. Since the Richardson Protocol was formally adopted 5 years ago, we have placed over 700 trained service animals in judicial settings. These animals have participated in over 400 cases. In 92% of those cases, they have provided information that was crucial to determining credibility or emotional state. In 43 cases, they have prevented potential miscarriages of justice. In 17 cases, they have been instrumental in exonerating individuals who were wrongly accused. Paused, letting those numbers sink in. 17 people who would have been imprisoned are now free. 17 families who would have been destroyed are now intact. 17 innocent lives that were saved because we learned to listen to what animals were trying to tell us. In a high school auditorium in Columbus, just miles from the courthouse where it all began, Maya Richardson was giving a speech to over 500 students. At 13 years old, she had grown into a young woman who carried herself with a quiet confidence and maturity that far exceeded her years. She had become an advocate for truth, a voice for children in difficult situations, and an unexpected celebrity in her own right. "I want to tell you about the worst day of my life," Maya began, her voice clear and strong. "And then I want to tell you about the best thing that came from it." She told them the story, the lie she was forced to tell, the terror she felt in the witness stand, the impossible choice between protecting her family and protecting an innocent man. She held nothing back. She described the shame, the guilt, the feeling that she was being torn apart from the inside out. "I was 8 years old," she said, "and I thought I had to choose between my family and justice. I thought I had to pick between two impossible things. But what I learned is that those choices don't have to be mutually exclusive. Because sometimes when you tell the truth, when you have the courage to communicate what you really feel, other people step in to help. Doctors, lawyers, police officers, social workers, and yes, even a really smart dog." The auditorium erupted in laughter and applause. "Buddy didn't fix everything," Maya continued. "My family still had to deal with consequences. My mom had to do community service. My brother had to work through his trauma. I had to go to therapy to process what happened. But we did it together. We did it with support. We did it by choosing truth. And we came out the other side stronger." Paused, looking directly at the students. "You're going to face difficult situations. You're going to be pressured to do things that don't feel right. People you love might ask you to compromise your integrity. But I'm telling you from experience, telling the truth is always worth it, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when the consequences seem unbearable, because truth has a way of creating space for healing. And sometimes an unexpected friend will help you carry the burden of that truth." After the speech, dozens of students lined up to talk to Maya. Some had their own stories of pressure and deception. Some wanted to tell her how much her honesty had meant to them. Some just wanted to say thank you for showing them that it was possible to survive making difficult choices and telling hard truths. At a secure facility in central Ohio, sat in a prison cell, serving a 15-year sentence. The man who had threatened a child, who had assaulted an innocent homeowner, who had tried to silence a witness through intimidation, had learned a hard lesson about the consequences of his actions. He had appealed his conviction twice. Both times, the appeals had been. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Daniel Richardson's testimony had been devastating. And Buddy's alert, which had set in motion the chain of events leading to his arrest, had become part of judicial legend. Would die in prison, most likely. He would never hurt another person. He would never threaten another child. Justice, in this case, had worked exactly as it was supposed to. Richard sat in his office at the headquarters of the Buddy and Beyond Foundation, reviewing applications from service dog handlers across the country. Hundreds of people were applying to place their animals in courtrooms. Hundreds of people believed, as did, that animals had something vital to contribute to the pursuit of justice. His own life had transformed completely. The trauma of being wrongly accused, of nearly going to prison for a crime he didn't commit, had burned away everything superficial in him. He had become single-minded in his dedication to preventing such tragedies from happening to others. He had donated over $2 million to the foundation. He had written a memoir about his experience that had become a bestseller. He had before state legislatures about judicial reform. He kept a framed photograph in his office of that moment in the courtroom when Buddy barked, the moment everything changed. And on his desk, he kept a smaller photograph, Buddy as a puppy, before anyone knew how remarkable he would become. The thing about Buddy, often told people, is that he wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just being a dog. He was loving a child. He was communicating distress. He was doing what he had been trained to do. And in doing those simple things, he changed my life. He changed the life of an entire family. He changed the judicial system. That's the power of authenticity. That's the power of genuine love expressed simply and clearly. Dr. Michael Foster had become the director of the Center for Animal Intelligence and Judicial Reform at Ohio State University. He supervised a team of researchers studying service animal behavior, developing new protocols, training new handlers and new dogs. He had published over 30 peer-reviewed papers on the subject. He was invited to speak at conferences around the world. But what he was most proud of was the training program he had developed specifically for dogs like Buddy, dogs with the sensitivity to recognize emotional distress, the training to communicate that distress clearly, and the temperament to remain calm and focused in high-stress environments like courtrooms. "We're not teaching dogs to be judges," Dr. Foster liked to say. "We're teaching them to be honest witnesses to human emotion, and that honesty, that ability to communicate what they perceive without agenda or bias, is invaluable to the pursuit of justice." Richardson had completed her community service and her probation. She was working as a victim advocate, helping families navigate the criminal justice system. She had become an advocate specifically for families threatened by criminals into silence. She worked with police departments to develop better protection protocols. She helped other mothers who faced impossible choices understand that there were resources, that they didn't have to sacrifice their children's integrity to protect them. Her relationship with her 2 children had healed, though it would never be quite the same as it had been before. Daniel was in college now, studying criminal justice. He wanted to become a detective, to work on the other side of the system he had once feared. Maya was thriving academically and emotionally, though she carried the wisdom of her experience in every decision she made. Kept a journal in which she wrote letters to Buddy, letters thanking him, letters acknowledging that her family had been saved not by her choices, but by the choices others made after her daughter's dog communicated the truth she had been trying to hide. And Buddy was retired now at age 11, living with Maya and her family in a comfortable home in suburban Columbus. He spent his days doing what he had always loved most, playing fetch in the backyard, sleeping in sunny patches on the living room floor, and being present with Maya as she navigated the complexities of being a teenager. He didn't know he was famous. He didn't understand that his name was taught in law schools. He didn't comprehend that his simple act of barking had created a national movement that had changed the judicial system. He only knew that his girl loved him, that she would never stop loving him, and that he would never stop loving her. When children asked Maya what Buddy's superpower was, she would always give the same answer. "He loved me." That was his superpower. Not the training, not the alerts, not the intelligence. Just love. He loved me enough to communicate my pain to the world, and that love changed everything. Judge, now in her early 60s, would sometimes walk past the courthouse where it had all happened. She would think about that terrified 8-year-old girl, about the desperate mother, about the innocent man nearly destroyed by injustice, about the remarkable dog who had somehow found a way to speak truth in a language that the entire legal system had learned to understand. She would think about how justice wasn't always about complicated legal arguments or perfect procedures. Sometimes it was about love. Sometimes it was about a child and her dog. Sometimes it was about the willingness to listen to unexpected voices and learn from them. And she would be grateful for that moment, grateful for what it had taught her, and grateful for the reminder that courage, truth, and love could transform a broken system into something approximating what justice was meant to be.